Today, we're going to talk about the 3 artifacts. First, we'll talk about the product backlog. The product backlog is a prioritized list of product backlog items. The product owner is in charge of assigning value to each of the items in the product backlog and prioritizing the product backlog based on those values. What you see here is we have many different sizes of product backlog items in our product backlog. By product backlog item, we're referring to any type of work that you might do in the future on this team. In your organization, you might call product backlog items user stories, epics, technical debt items, bugs, defects, enhancements, or many other things. All of these different things are considered types of product backlog items. The colors of the product backlog items here in this diagram designate what type of product backlog item they are. Understand that there are many different sizes of product backlog items as well. You can see that in our diagram too. Next, we have the sprint backlog. Many teams visualize their sprint backlog using Kanban boards. We're going to draw a very simple version of a Kanban board here. We will have a to-do or not started state. We will have a doing or in progress state. And we will have a done or finished or completed state. During an event called sprint planning, the Scrum team will opt to bring product backlog items in from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. The product backlog is all the future work that we know we can engage in for our product. The sprint backlog is all of the work that we're agreeing to do this sprint. Here we've chosen to bring in several product backlog items that agree with our sprint goal. As long as the team agrees that we can get all of the work done during the sprint, which we will probably use empirical data like velocity to help us determine, then we are in agreement that this is the right collection of product backlog items for the sprint. Once that's been settled, the developers work on identifying the tasks that are needed to accomplish the product backlog items. These are the little squares. The blue product backlog item ends up with 7 tasks. This is sort of a how-to guide of getting the blue item done. Likewise, the developers decide on tasks for the red product backlog item. They do the same for the remaining product backlog items as well, the dark blue item and the purple item. Throughout the sprint, the developers work on these tasks to get the product backlog items done. First, you see that the developers completed the dark blue item because they completed all of the dark blue tasks. They ran those tasks through doing one task at a time, and as those tasks were completed, they were moved to done. When the product owner accepted the dark blue item's work, the developers moved the dark blue product backlog item from to do to done. Likewise, you can see the developers did the same with the red product backlog item. The developers attempted to get the light blue product backlog item done by engaging in all of the light blue tasks. As they completed those tasks, they moved them to done just like they did with the dark blue item and the red item. But by the end of the sprint, they hadn't completed all of the light blue tasks. Therefore, the light blue product backlog item was not reviewed by the product owner, and therefore it's not considered done. Similarly, the team did not have time to address the purple item's tasks, so that item is not considered done either. The third artifact in Scrum is the increment. Some teams consider the increment to be the done work from the sprint that they're finishing at the time. Other Scrum teams consider the increment to be all of the done work that their team has ever attempted in the past. Regardless of how your team views the increment must only have done work in it. So we need to actually make sure that the work that was completed in the sprint meets our guaranteed level of quality for our team. This level of quality is referred to as the definition of done. Here in this picture, we're showing the definition of done as a document called the DOD. In order to get the done product backlog items into the increment, or for them to become part of the increment, the Scrum team needs to compare the done product backlog items from the sprint to the level of quality described in the definition of done. If the level of quality of those product backlog items lives up to the definition of done or even exceeds it, then those product backlog items become part of the increment. If they do not, then they go back to the product backlog to be reprioritized by the product owner and may be brought into a subsequent sprint in the future. If you're wondering what happens to the light blue product backlog item and the purple product backlog item, those are the items that were not finished during the sprint, they too go back to the product backlog to be reprioritized by the product owner and possibly brought into a future sprint. There are a few things that we need to remember when thinking about the increment. Number one is that all of the work that's added to the increment is considered done. It was considered done by the developers when they finished the tasks. It was considered done by the product owner when the product owner accepted that work. And it was considered done by the entire Scrum team when they compared those done items at the end of the sprint to the definition of done. So we consider the product backlog items that make up the increment fairly done. We do not expect to do any more work with these product backlog items in the future. Next is usable. We expect the increment to be functional or usable at all times. Any functionality that we've ever added to our increment should remain functioning forever. The increment's functionality should not be disrupted or completely broken if we add items from the current sprint to the increment. Finally, releasable. By releasable, we mean that the increment should remain in a releasable state at all times. This does not mean that the increment is a release in itself. It does not mean that the increment needs to be released at the end of the sprint. When we say artifacts in Scrum, we mean representations of work. The product backlog is a representation of all future work for this team. The sprint backlog is a representation of work that the team is currently engaged in. And finally, the increment is a representation of work that was done in the past. I hope that helps you remember that the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment are the three artifacts in Scrum. The product backlog being the future of the product, the increment being all of the work that was finished in the past, and the sprint backlog being the work that's being done right now by the developers. Thank you.